3 bone-chilling secrets in the woods. What they don't want you to disturb at midnight. The moon hung high, casting ghostly shadows over the ancient woodland. Night engulfed everything, amplifying the whispers of a chilling breeze that carried secrets meant to stay hidden. Somewhere, deep within those woods, bizarre things stirred. Locals claimed 3 bone-chilling mysteries lurked in the darkness, and if you listened closely, you could hear the eerie echoes of what had happened there. What could possibly draw the curious soul into such a haunting place? Rumors bubbled among the townsfolk, each tale twisting more wildly than the last. There was the tale about the cursed tree, a gnarled hunk of wood that some said wept blood on moonlit nights. When touched, it was believed to reveal horrifying truths. Many dared not approach it, fearing the consequences of awakening its restless spirit. Eyes widened in disbelief. Gasps filled the air when this story circulated at the diner. People's voices trembled as they recalled the last known soul who laid a finger on that foul bark. Vanessa Wells. They say she went mad, babbling about shadows with eyes watching her, clutching at her head like it was about to split open. Then there was the old cabin abandoned for decades, yet light flickered inside at twilight. Those brave enough to venture close claimed to hear soft singing, sweet and terrifying all at once, wrapping around their hearts like a cold embrace. Yet, stepping through that threshold often resulted in more than they ever bargained for, disappearing without a trace. No one boldly returned to share what it was they experienced. How could anyone be so reckless? And let us not forget the chilling cry that echoed through the treetops, a low growl that felt unnatural, clawing at your very soul. Hunters would huddle together by their fires, eyes wide and cheeks pale, sharing superstitions about a creature that roams the woods at night. They spoke of its grotesque form, blending seamlessly into the night, as if it thrived on the fear that swept through even the toughest of them. No one had seen it and lived to tell the tale. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button. It really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The nights grew longer, shadows darker, as each secret intertwined with the next, creating a web of dread. The woods breathed life into tall tales, enticing wanderers into the darkness, urging them to discover their own answers. An unspeakable urge drew people forward. Perhaps they too could unravel the mystery. But then, the sudden snap of a twig halted them, an ominous presence creeping closer, making hearts race with primal fear. What waited just beyond the underbrush? Would anyone dare to find out? Or would the secrets remain forever buried, resting in the dark? The air turned electric, and a tense silence enveloped the woods. The snapping twig lingered in the air, echoing ominously like a countdown. Annie's breath hitched in her throat, her heart pounding fiercely against her ribcage. Her friends, Greg and Mia, stood frozen beside her, wide-eyed and breathing hard. They had come here seeking adventure, hoping to prove themselves brave enough to challenge the whispering legends. Now, it felt like a dare they might not survive. Did you hear that? Greg whispered, his voice barely breaking the oppressive silence. Annie nodded, her mind racing back to the legends they'd recited around the campfire. She could practically visualize the cursed tree, its branches reaching out like skeletal fingers to snatch the unwary. We should go, she urged, casting furtive glances into the surrounding shadows that seemed to hold more than just trees. But Mia, the most curious of the trio, squinted into the darkness. What if it's just an animal? She countered, though even she sounded unsure, her voice trembling as she spoke. What if it's a deer? Another crack sounded, this time closer. It was not the rustle of a mere creature. It felt heavier, prowling, something deliberate that moved with intent. They exchanged glances, fear pooling in their chests, yet a daring spark flickered between them. Let us follow it, Annie blurted out, her own voice feeling distant and unreal, as if it belonged to someone else. Before either could protest, she started forward, adrenaline blinding her reason. The path turned treacherous, branches clawing at their clothes, the thick forest seeming to conspire against them. As they delved deeper, a soft glow flickered to life beyond the trees, a light that didn't belong. The cabin. Mia gasped, glancing back at Greg, whose brow was knotted with anxiety. A long shadow flickered across the ground, and their stomachs dropped simultaneously. They edged closer until the brambles parted, revealing the dilapidated structure. The light danced through a cracked window, illuminating remnants of the past. A forgotten porch sagged under its weight, and the air was sweet with decay, but there was something undeniable luring them in. Greg hesitated. Guys, we shouldn't be here. Anyone could be inside. What if it's... Don't be a coward. Annie shot back, shushing him. She took a cautious step forward, the old boards creaking ominously beneath her foot. The singing, haunting and ethereal, twisted its way through the rotting walls, drawing them in like moths to a flame. Annie, wait! Mia cried, but it was too late. Annie pressed on, her heartbeat so loud it drowned out even the dissonant melody that beckoned her closer. The door swung open with an unsettling creak, revealing a dim, dusty interior. Shadows clung to the corners as if trying to avoid the light. A whisper curved through the air, brushing past them like a chill wind. Stay, dance with us. Annie stepped inside, her breath catching as she felt something soft brush against her skin. Was it a hand? Fear surged, but curiosity anchored her to the spot. Then, in a heartbeat, the melody stopped. The air grew thicker, suffocating. In the window, something emerged, a silhouette blocking out the moonlight, an impossible shape that writhed and shifted. It seemed to hunger for their fear. Annie? Greg's voice shattered the silence, panic setting in as he reached for her. But she could only stare into the darkness, feeling herself slack. As if trapped in a dream, she couldn't escape. Then, as quickly as it had formed, the shadow lunged, drawing the last of the moonlight into a consuming blackness. Run! Mia screamed, pulling Greg back as panic fluttered in their chests, closing in. They turned to flee, but the door swung shut behind them with a final, ominous thud. Outside, the woods closed in, breaths turning frantic. But the echo of the singing returned, mingling with dry laughter. What had they awakened? The moon shined down, casting eerie flickers of reality against their wide eyes that eye in the distance. A low growl vibrated through the trees, chilling them to the core. It was the sound they had heard before, the thing that never died, waiting for them in the dark. Who would escape the horror that thrived in the woods, and at what cost? A heavy shroud of darkness fell around them as they darted away from the cabin, the sounds of the forest closing in like hungry wolves. Annie's heart raced, each beat echoing in her ears as they stumbled over roots and uneven ground. Breaths came sharp and quick, panic surging as adrenaline coursed through their veins. Annie, we can't just leave you. Greg stammered, his voice cracking with fear. But Annie was nowhere near the cabin anymore. A fog had crept into her mind, clouding everything. She halted, her eyes wide, trapped in the memory of that shadow. It was both terrifying and mesmerizing. We have to, she gasped. We need to go back. Are you crazy? Mia shouted, gripping her arm so tight it hurt. There is something in there. We'll get killed. The whispers from the cabin wafted through the trees like a haunting melody, filling the air with promises of twisted delights. Stay with us, it called, a sinister lullaby that slipped under their skin, pulling at their resolve. Gritting her teeth, Annie tore her gaze away from the darkness. No, we can't go back. We need to stick together, please. Her voice held a desperate edge, her breath coming out in frantic huffs as she glanced back. The silhouettes in the cabin seemed to gather, their forms shifting and swaying, as if preparing to close in on them. They ran deeper into the woods, fear making their legs heavy and their breath ragged. Branches snagged at their clothes, but they pressed on, hearts pounding as they fought against shadows that seemed to stretch out like fingers, trying to trap them in the depths of the trees. As the whispers faded behind them, a sudden stillness engulfed the forest, unnatural and suffocating. It felt wrong, as if the world held its breath. Did we lose it? Mia whispered, her eyes darting around when even the sounds of rustling leaves halted. Annie slowed, glancing between her friends. Maybe it's gone, she said, half hoping, half doubting. But a knot twisted in her stomach as the oppressive silence stretched on. And then, A sound broke through the chilling thud of footsteps, slow and deliberate. "Move," Annie shouted, adrenaline giving her voice new strength. They turned to run again, but the sound grew more distinct, echoing farther behind them, as if something was hunting them, savoring the chase. Greg tripped over a tree root, tumbling to the ground with a gasp. "Go. I'll be fine," he pleaded, desperately pushing himself up. "No way," Mia yelled, already skidding to a stop. "We have to help him." Just then, an unearthly howl pierced the air. It reverberated through the woods, hanging over them like a dark omen. Every muscle screamed to run, but they stood frozen, hoisted in a moment that felt like an eternity. From behind the trees, glowing eyes emerged. They watched, predatory and cold, ready to pounce at the first sign of weakness. There was no escape, no way to conceal their rising terror. "Annie," Mia breathed, her eyes darting between the fray of shadows. "What do we do?" "Trust me," Annie shouted, instinct kicking in as she turned to Greg. "We can't just leave him. Take my hand." "I'm not going anywhere," Greg insisted, shaking his head. "They're there waiting for us." Annie lunged forward, grabbing his arm, drawing him toward the dwindling light that flickered somewhere in the woods. "Then let us make them chase us." But as they began to run again, the growling grew louder, each step sounding like a promise of doom. The darkness opened behind them, a vast, hungry maw ready to swallow them whole. They fled into the unknown, racing against their own shadows, one step away from losing everything. But the further they ran, the more they felt the forest closing around them, the shadows growing thicker, waiting for the moment when their will would break. And in the chilling quiet that followed each new howl, a dreadful realization dawned. It wouldn't just be the cabin they had awakened. What else lurked in the woods watching them, waiting to join the hunt? Annie's breath felt like fire in her lungs as they hurtled through the underbrush, branches clawing at their skin like desperate hands. The sounds of pursuit echoed like a heartbeat behind them, a relentless reminder that they weren't alone in the dark. "Left. This way," Annie shouted, spotting a narrow path weaving through the trees. Mia and Greg didn't hesitate. They followed her lead. With each turn, the shadows seemed to whisper, encircling them tighter, a looming presence ready to pounce. Suddenly, the ground dipped beneath them, and they stumbled into a clearing. Moonlight broke through the dense canopy overhead, illuminating the area in an eerie glow. It felt like a temporary sanctuary, but Annie knew better. They were not safe yet. "What now?" Mia panted, her hands digging into her knees as she gasped for air. Fear glinted in her eyes, and Annie could see her trembling. "We need to find a way out. Somewhere to hide," Annie replied, scanning the clearing for anything that could be useful. Just then, she noticed a dilapidated old shed on the far end, partially shrouded by overgrown hedges. It looked abandoned, but it was a choice better than standing out in the open. "Over there," she pointed, urgency lacing her voice. "We can hide in that shed." Greg's eyes darted to the darkness of the shed. "What if something's in there?" he asked, panic seeping into his words. "Right now, it's our only option. We can't stay here," Annie argued, fueled by rising desperation. With shared glances of uncertainty, they bolted towards the shed. The door creaked as they pushed it open, and they slipped inside, hearts hammering against their ribs. The smell of rotting wood and damp earth filled their nostrils as they huddled together in the dim light, breathless and trembling. "It's quiet," Mia whispered, peering through a crack in the wall. "Maybe they lost us." Annie wished she could believe that. The silence hung heavy, full of unspoken danger. "We need to gather ourselves," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the prickling fear crawling down her spine. Suddenly, a rustling noise erupted from somewhere nearby, an eerie shuffle that made their hearts skip a beat. Annie held her breath, her grip tightening around the edges of an old, splintered plank she had picked up from the floor. It felt pitifully inadequate. "Did you hear that?" she whispered fiercely. Yet Greg's voice was hollow. "What if it's gone back for help?" A low growl rumbled from outside, deep and resonant, and every hair on Annie's arm stood on end. "It can't know we're here," she breathed, holding herself as still as possible. They needed to think, to plan, but as the growling grew closer, an icy finger of dread gripped Annie's gut. Could they outsmart whatever was stalking them? "Listen," Mia said urgently, eyes wide. "What if we make a distraction? Draw it away from here and get a head start? Annie nodded slowly, weighing the possibility in her mind. It could work, but we can't leave Greg. I can create a sound. Something far away. Greg proposed, his voice trembling but resolute. I can throw a rock or something. Just let me distract it. Panic surged through Annie. No, we can't risk you. But Greg was already moving towards the door, determination set in his features. Listen to me. Just as he reached for the handle, a shadow passed by the shed. Annie froze, her heart racing. Something else lurked outside, and they weren't alone. Was it only one creature, or was the forest filled with them? In that moment, the howls returned, thrumming through the grove like a funeral dirge, echoing their doom. The darkness intensified, pressing in on them, suffocating their resolve. The choice was made, Annie thought, panic tightening in her chest. What if we have to sacrifice someone to get away? Just then, as if answering her silent fear, the door creaked dangerously behind Greg, swinging slowly ajar. Heavy breaths filled the air, and something snarled in the shadows that Annie's heart plummeted. We have to go now. But as they turned, the bright eyes glinted in the darkness, revealing a row of sharp teeth. They were not just being hunted. The hunters had come to claim their prize. What would they sacrifice to escape? Annie's heart raced as the door swung open wider, revealing a figure shimmering in the shadows. The moonlight caught on glistening teeth, sharp enough to shred flesh. Gasps filled the air, and a primal instinct kicked in. There wasn't time to think, only to react. Run! Annie screamed, lunging toward the back of the shed, pulling Mia behind her as Greg stumbled back in shock. Mia's breath hitched, and her wide eyes darted to Greg. Come on! With a quick jolt, Greg snapped out of it, racing after them as they darted past old hay bales and rusty tools. The growl transformed into a menacing huff, and Annie dared a glance back. The creature was moving closer, a shadow driven by hunger, muscles rippling underneath a matted layer of fur. Over here, Annie pointed to a broken window at the rear of the shed, shards of glass still glinting like a trap. They had to escape, but at what cost? Can you make it? Greg asked, urgency threading through his words. I'll go. She shot back, her instincts on high alert. Climbing over debris, she hastily looked for the best way out. You two follow. Without waiting for confirmation, Annie slipped through the jagged opening, gasping as cold air sliced against her skin. She landed in a roll, her ankle twisting painfully. The ground beneath her was soft with loamy soil, a small relief, but she barely had time to assess her injury. Annie, came Greg's voice, panic-coated but closer than before. Keep moving, she shouted, scrambling to rise, catching sight of Mia wedging herself through next. Greg followed closely, but the creature's south growl came close on their heels. The clearing opened up, but Annie knew they couldn't linger. The moonlight mocked them as they emerged. It felt too bright, too revealing. Where they landed, branches twisted and curled like skeletal fingers reaching out, and they stumbled into deeper darkness. Scanning the treeline, Annie spotted a cluster of boulders, a possible refuge. Over there, she barked, leading them toward the rocks as adrenaline surged through her like electricity. They ducked behind the boulders, hearts racing, breathless. Shadows danced around them, and the growling intensified. The air thickened. They could feel the presence of the beast searching, snuffing out their scent. What now? Mia panted, her voice shrill. We need to be quiet, Annie whispered, pressing a finger to her lips. Sweat dripped down her forehead, mingling with the dirt on her skin. She couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched, even from behind their rocky cover. But then, silence enveloped them, thick and heavy. Annie felt a bead of dread trickle down her spine. Do you hear that? The growl had died down, replaced by something unsettling, a rustling, like branches moving against one another. Farther out in the darkness, something else was stirring. Annie, Greg's voice faltered. What if it's not just one? Images flooded back from the panic-fueled chase, the shadows, the quick movements, the monstrous urging from the woods. They were not alone in the dark. Before she could finish, a low, guttural howl erupted, reverberating through the night. It bounced off the boulders and clawed at their sanity. The utter hopelessness crashed into Annie's chest, leaving a lump that made it hard to breathe. We have to move. Now, Annie ordered, her instincts screaming they had to get out before whatever lurked out there came for them. Just as they started to crawl out from their hiding spot, the old floor of the shed creaked ominously behind them. The loose boards shifted again as if mocking their escape. What if it's waiting for us? Mia shrieked, her eyes wild with fear, but there was no time to ponder. Without a plan, they stumbled forward, and all Annie could think was that they needed to survive. No matter the cost, as they raced into the thicket, the shadows morphed into lurking shapes, a chorus of growls rising around them. What if we're walking right into their den? Greg's words slipped out like jagged rocks, leaving hope shattered beneath their feet. Annie's heart screamed with resolve. Then we'll fight. We'll fight for each other. But just as they plunged deeper into the woods, another howl sliced through the air, leaving the unmistakable echo of malevolence. They were not alone, and whatever hunted them was relentless. What awaited them in that darkness? Would it be the end, or were they about to unveil a darker truth hidden deep within the woods? Branches snagged at Annie's clothes as she darted forward, a frantic instinct driving her deeper into the woods. The growling intensified, becoming a symphony of terror that echoed in the night. Every muscle in her body tightened, urging her on. Faster, she shouted, glancing back to see Greg and Mia right behind her, fear etched on their faces. The moonlight filtered through the trees, but now it felt more like a spotlight, exposing their every movement. She chanced a quick look over her shoulder again. The creature, a massive silhouette of pure menace, crashed through the foliage behind them. Panic flooded her veins as she stumbled into a thick patch of underbrush, nearly falling. Annie, wait! Greg's desperate shout pulled her back to reality. She spun around, fear gripping her. We can't keep running like this. We need a plan. But what plan could there be against a beast that thrived in shadows? There's got to be something, anything, she murmured. Then, she spotted a dilapidated cabin looming in the distance, almost hidden under a thick canopy of vines. There, she gestured, her fingers trembling with anxiety. Are you crazy? Mia gasped, the panic in her eyes threatening to spill over. We don't know what's inside. The alternative is worse. Annie countered, fear sharpening her voice. They had no time to waste. With that, she led the way, sprinting toward the cabin, hoping it held some refuge, or at the very least, a weapon to defend themselves. As they reached the cabin's splintered door, a cacophony of howls erupted again, shrill and haunting. Mia hesitated, her hand hovering above the doorknob. What if it's a trap? Annie pushed against the door, the wood creaking in protest as it swung open. We have to take the chance, she whispered, shoving her feelings of dread aside and stepping inside. The interior was cloaked in darkness, old furniture draped in cobwebs, and dust danced in the ethereal moonlight that crept through broken windows. Stay close, she murmured, her voice breaking the eerie silence. The scent of mildew and decay filled her nostrils as they moved cautiously. Then, a blinding flash of realization hit her. The walls were covered in crude drawings, symbols, and markings that seemed to pulsate with a life of their own. Ancient runes? Ritualistic shapes? What the hell is this? Greg gasped, glancing around with wide eyes. I don't know, but it feels wrong. Annie's instinct tingled. The markings resonated with something sinister. Whatever's out there, it's connected to this cabin. Another howl broke through the air, but this time it felt different, less of a warning, more of a summons. Annie could feel the energy shift, a malevolent force drawing closer. She turned to her friends, urgency clawing at her. We have to find something here. A weapon, a clue, anything. They spread out, frantically searching through the debris. Shadows twisted, and the oppressive air seemed to bear down on them, amplifying their dread. Greg found a rusty axe among some old tools. This might help, he said, gripping it tightly. Mia opened a moth-eaten book lying on a dusty table, flipping through its pages frantically. These drawings, they're rituals, she exclaimed, her eyes wide. They summon something. Annie felt a chill race up her spine. Summon what? What are we dealing with? But before Mia could reply, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The sound echoed like thunder, cutting off their breath. They rushed to push against it, but it wouldn't budge. What the hell? Greg shouted, panic rising in his chest. Mia? Annie's voice trembled as she turned, noticing shadows sliding around them, filling the cabin with an ominous energy. What did we wake up? Their fear escalated as the howling grew louder, a chorus of rage swelling just beyond the cabin walls. The feeling of being trapped tightened like a vice. Annie's heart pounded, and doubt seeped in. We might have unleashed something we shouldn't have, and now it's coming for us. Just then, the walls began to vibrate unnervingly, the symbols glowing with an unsettling light. The air crackled with energy, and in that moment, Annie realized whatever was lurking outside was not the only threat. What lay in the depths of this cabin? Would they discover a way to survive, or would they fall prey to the dark secrets hidden within these haunting walls? Annie's heart raced as the walls throbbed with a grotesque light, the symbols illuminating their terrified faces. Shadows flickered, swirling like a living nightmare. Greg held the axe tighter, ready to defend them against any unseen force. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice shaky. Mia, still clutching the moth-eaten book, her fingers trembling, flipped to a page filled with more of those disturbing drawings. "These rituals, they're not just for summoning. This one here," she pointed to a drawing depicting a ring of fire. "It says something about creating a barrier." "A barrier?" Annie echoed, hope igniting within her. "Can we do that? Can we work with it?" Mia's eyes darted around, filled with fear and desperation. "I think so. But we need to find something to create it, a way to enact the ritual fast." "Great. A ritual in a spooky cabin," Greg muttered under his breath, scanning the room. "Surely we'll find candles, or something." The howling intensified from outside. It was as if the creature was drawing closer, sensing their vulnerability. Annie felt a surge of dread. "Faster. Look for anything." Annie moved toward a dark corner, wading through the debris. Just then, something cold brushed against her arm. She gasped, pulling away to reveal a silver chalice covered in dust. "This could work." "Get it," Greg shouted, the fear in his eyes mingling with determination. Meanwhile, Mia rifled through the shelves. "Look here. Herbs. We can use these, but we need fire." "That's easy," Greg yelled. His voice surged with confidence. He pulled the rusty axe from his side and slammed it against a nearby chair. Splintered wood flew. "We can make a fire." As they gathered the remnants of furniture, the dim light flickered, casting odd shapes across the room. Annie felt the gnawing sensation of something watching them. "Greg, hurry," she urged, catching the darkening glint in the corner of her eye. "It's coming." In an instant, he piled the wood and struck the axe against the dull metal of the chalice, creating sparks that danced in the air. The fire caught quickly, crackling to life. "Now what?" he gasped, glancing back at Mia. "Pour the chalice through the fire," she commanded, her voice urgent. "Well, whatever we can find in the book, follow the symbols. We have to create the barrier." As they worked together, chanting the words from the book, shadows swirled with malicious intent. The howling outside escalating to a furious crescendo. It was no longer just wind, it was the creature, drawn by their heat, their life. The walls pulsed ominously. Annie felt her skin tingle. Would this work? Would they manage to contain whatever dark entity lurked beyond those walls? A deep rumble filled the air, vibrating through the floor. "Keep going," she screamed, the words barely above a whisper, fear tightening her throat. "We can do this." But just as they took the final step, pain shot through Annie's chest, a splintering darkness suffocating her voice. She could feel the shadows expand. Something was fighting back. The fire flickered, stuttering under the weight of the impending darkness. Behind them, the door shuddered violently, and then it ripped open. A blast of cold air swept through the cabin. The howls morphed into chaotic screams, blending with the frantic heartbeat of the cabin. They turned, faces frozen in horror. Annie's breath hitched as she met the gaze of a beast, its eyes reflecting the flickering flames. It was more than a monster. It was an embodiment of their worst fears. Their eyes locked, and in that moment, she understood they had awakened something ancient that had long been forgotten, something that held the power to consume them whole. What fed this creature's hunger? Would it devour them, or would they learn to harness its dark energy? In the split second that followed, reality blurred. The walls of the cabin began to buckle, drawing them into a chilling vortex of confusion. Annie grasped Greg and Mia's arms, willing them to stay together. "Whatever happens, don't let go." As they stood on the precipice of desperation, a bone-chilling laugh echoed through the cabin. What had they truly unleashed? And could they survive the night? Annie squeezed Greg in Mia's arms, her pulse pounding like a drum against the creeping shadows. The beast's eyes seemed to glow with an otherworldly hunger, drawing them deeper into its haunting depths. It had come alive, an avatar of their deepest fears. With each quickening breath, the space around them constricted, the walls of the cabin shivering as if aware of their impending doom. "Stay focused," Mia cried, breaking the trance. "Pour the chalice. Now." With trembling hands, Greg lifted the chalice, filled with herbs and their flickering hopes. He approached the fire, heart racing against the oppressive darkness that threatened to swallow them whole. The flame danced, reflecting their desperation. Igniting the air with a feral energy, he poured the contents through the blaze. The flames erupted higher, thick tendrils snaking around the room. A surge of heat enveloped them, making Annie gasp. The creature snarled, the air vibrating with its raw power. It lunged forward, claws glinting in the firelight, its breath heavy with decay. "Keep chanting," Annie shouted, her voice cutting through the rising chaos. "We can't let it break through." Their voices mingled, rising into the cacophony of desperate incantation. With each word, the walls visibly shook, shaking off years of silence, sadness, and secrecy. Shadows clawed at the edges of the room, swirling like a tornado intent on ripping apart their fragile reality. Suddenly, pain shot through Annie's chest again, sharper this time. She gasped, nearly choking on the fear clawing at her throat. "I can't breathe, don't think about it," Greg shouted, his voice rough but commanding. "Think of the barrier. We have to contain it." Mia's face was a mask of terror and determination, sweat glistening on her brow. "Just hold on. We're almost there." But the beast was relentless, its howls piercing through their incantations, creating a twisted harmony of fear and fury. It surged forward, sending debris flying, the cabin shuddering like a leaf in a storm. Annie could feel the heat of the flames wane as the creature drew closer, shadows congealing around it like a protective shroud. In that moment of terrifying clarity, she understood. This beast was desolation personified. It had risen due to their reckless meddling, feeding off their fear and uncertainty. "Annie, focus," Greg roared, snapping her back. "We can't let it win. Join me." With all her strength, Annie lunged forward, her hand gripping the chalice. In that split second, she felt a flicker of power, that same old, ancient energy pulsing in harmony with the barrier they were trying to summon. Pulled by instinct, she thrust the chalice forward, again pouring the contents into the fire. The flames blazed, casting strange shadows that contorted and twisted, reflecting their fears right back at them. But something was different. Something was building. "Oh, great forgotten flesh of ash and bone," they chanted, voices uniting as one through the crackle of the blazing fire. The creature howled, the sound drowning their voices, but they didn't relent. Greg's hands were raw, agony crawling up his arm, but he pressed on. Mia gritted her teeth, channeling all her resolve. A moment of silence hit them like ice water. The air thickened, as if the world held its breath. And just as suddenly, an explosion of light erupted from the fire, scattering dark shadows like the breaking dawn. A blinding brilliance enveloped them, as the barrier formed a protective wall of flickering energy, pulsing like the beating heart of the earth. But the beast wasn't done. It reared back, clawing at the barrier with desperate rage. Annie's heart sank. "It's fighting back. We need to make it stronger." In that instant, she remembered the drawing in the book, the one promising protection, a sigil needing a sacrifice. Her stomach knotted painfully. "I have to give it something, don't I?" "No, don't even think about it." Mia's voice was urgent, but Annie couldn't help but feel it was a sacrifice they might need. The creature screeched, a primal sound that ripped through them. "Annie, no." Greg reached out, but she was already stepping closer to the threshold of the fire. As she prepared to channel her own energy into the barrier, she felt a hand grip her arm. A chilling whisper filled her ears. More than sacrifice is needed, the truth behind the fear must be faced. Annie's heart raced as she stared into those eyes, unyielding and all-consuming. What truth did she need to confront? And how far was she willing to go to save them? Annie's breath came in ragged bursts, her mind swirling with questions. "What truth?" she murmured, her throat dry as ashes. The creature began to pulse with a sinister energy, a tension all its own, its presence a suffocating weight that pressed against her chest. "Annie!" Mia screamed, panic skimming over her brows. "Focus on the barrier." Yet all Annie could conjure was the voice still whispering in her ear. The truth behind the fear must be faced, each syllable wrapped around her, tightening like a noose. Just a step closer. The flames danced, shadows licking at her skin, curling around her like serpents. The air shimmered with electric energy, and the beast, flesh and fury, bared its jagged teeth, inching toward them, gnashing, craving. "Get back!" Greg shouted, eyes wide with desperation. He was trembling, a thin sheen of sweat glistening on his forehead. "We have to fortify this barrier." Annie hesitated. The more she focused on the beast, the more it seemed to thrive from her fear. But she knew, deep down, facing the truth, whatever that might mean, could be their salvation. "I have to do this," she spoke softly, almost to herself. "Annie, please." Mia reached for her, eyes pleading. "Don't." But the grip of resolve had taken hold. It was as if the cabin itself urged her on, the echo of its heartbeat syncing with hers. The sigil, glowing in her imagination, called to her a beacon of hope in the growing darkness. As if sensing her determination, the beast let out a roar that caused the very ground to tremble. Its eyes locked onto Annie, a twisted mixture of awareness and instinct merging in a grotesque display of hunger. She felt her heart, now a battleground for fear and courage. "Annie, you don't have to face this alone," Greg shouted, his eyes locked onto hers like an anchor. But how could she explain? The truth was so far buried, tangled in memories of her past, dredged up by that very darkness. It was not just a fight against the beast, but against the shadows within. She had to confront what lurked in her heart. Annie stepped closer, a determination fueling her resolve. "I will face you," she declared, voice firm. "I know what you are." The creature recoiled, momentarily thrown off balance by her courage. The air pulsed with tension, a moment suspended in time. She closed her eyes, delving deep into her mind, recalling moments of weakness, pain, and regret. All of it tangled in the fear that had maybe, just maybe, welcomed this creature to life. "Face it. Embrace it." The chilling voice whispered again, urging her on. "Only through acceptance can you break free." She opened her eyes, firelight illuminating the room, her heart pounding in sync with that of the walls around her. "I'm not afraid," she shouted, feeling a flicker of warmth igniting within her soul. The beast hesitated, eyes narrowing as if analyzing this new perspective. "You think facing me will kill the fear?" Its voice rumbled, eerily low. Annie took a deep breath, ready to proclaim the darkest thoughts that had chased her in silence. "You were born from my own doubts, but I see you now." With another roar, the creature surged, the sound vengeful and sorrowful. "Annie," Mia called, fear crackling in the air, but Annie felt a swell of strength, inching closer to the edge of that fiery barrier. "I will accept my fears." With each word, she prepared to unleash everything she buried, her hopes, her failures, her anger. The barrier pulsed wildly, drawing on the energy of her embracing the truth. The shadows flickered, shifting like sand in the wind, revealing haunting images. Memories flashed before her, a moment of betrayal, the loss of trust, the isolation, a lifetime's worth of fears. Let the truth unravel. The beast's eyes widened, confusion and terror rippling across its harsh features. And then, with a terrifying clarity, that unspeakable truth began to unveil itself, piercing through the veil of her mind like a sharp blade. The air grew heavy, the beast shuddering as if understanding the weight of those words. "Annie, don't." Greg reached out, his voice filled with urgency, but it was too late. The barrier trembled, poised to tip either way. A decision lay within her grasp. What would she uncover from facing her deepest fears? Was she ready to tear through the darkness, to wrestle with that which had haunted her for so long? The moment stretched on, time seemingly suspending, begging for a choice, and just then, a crack appeared in the barrier, the noise a deafening silence filled with potential destruction. "What will you unleash?" the beast growled, its voice thick with an unspeakable longing as shadows writhed around it. Waiting, Annie's heart raced, knowing she stood at the precipice of destiny, a truth waiting to unravel. to either free them or obliterate everything they've ever known. Annie's heart raced as she faced the pulsing shadows that surrounded her, the truth lingering just out of reach. She felt the beast's dark energy clawing at her, trying to hold her back, but a fire ignited in her chest, fueled by the desperation of the moment. This was it. She was no longer just a scared girl running from her fears. She was ready to confront the darkness. Enough, Annie shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. I'm taking control. You don't own me. The creature recoiled, its twisted form shimmering and warping in response to her determination. It was a battle of wills, and her resolve was the sword she would wield. She stepped closer, heart thundering, breath hot with conviction. I accept the fear you represent. I embrace every part of it. She raised her hands, feeling the warmth of the flames behind her. I'm not ashamed. With each word, the barrier pulsed, vibrant energy radiating through the cabin. She felt the weight of every insecurity dissolve away, replaced by a sense of freedom. Annie, no. Mia yelled again, panic breaking through their urgency. But there was no turning back now. Annie's focus sharpened, the truth uncoiling, releasing itself into the open air. Watching the shadows swirl, she articulated her pain. I am not defined by my fears. They are a part of me, but they do not control me. You do not control me. The air thickened, and the beast faltered, its confidence wavering. Suddenly, the ground shook, and the howling rose to a fever pitch. Shadows fled the fire, swept back under the swirl of energy she was bringing forth. This ends tonight, she declared, her voice unwavering. The walls crackled, and she could see flickers of light breaking free from the darkness. The symbols on the walls buzzed and glowed, responding to her defiance. Annie, please, Greg called, fear etched into his expression. We need to get out of here. But Annie shook her head, adrenaline coursing through her like a river. We're not leaving until this is over. With one last surge of strength, she shouted, I will not be your prisoner any longer. The roar of the creature rose to a crescendo, a sound of vulnerability intertwining with rage. The shadows swirled violently, colliding with the barrier crackling with energy. The power surged in waves, and in that moment, Annie realized she was not alone. Mia was beside her, chanting with unwavering belief. Greg joined in, holding the axe like a shield, a fierce protector against the gathering night. The beast lunged, trying to plunge through the barrier, but Annie held firm, her words combining with the growing force to form an unbreakable bond. She could feel the fear receding, its grip loosening. The monster faltered, its elongated shadow dissolving under the heat of their combined light. With a final shout, she let go of her fears completely. The cabin swelled with light, bursting outward like a supernova, illuminating their broken sanctuary. The air vibrated with energy, and the last vestiges of shadows screamed, retreating into the darkness from whence they came. In a blinding flash, everything went still. The howls faded into silence. The beast was gone. Breathless, Annie fell to her knees, eyes wide as she looked at her friends. The cabin, once a dark warren of dread, began to change before their eyes. The symbols on the walls faded, the oppressive energy lifting. Did we do it? Mia gasped, her eyes glistening with disbelief. I think so, Annie replied, overwhelmed but relieved. It's over. They stood together, united by an unwavering bond forged in darkness. The moonlight streamed through the broken windows, casting soft rays over them. But as they stepped out of the cabin, the night felt less threatening. The woods, though still hauntingly beautiful, held an air of peace they had never known before. It was as if the forest had sighed, releasing its tension, welcoming their survival. We need to hurry back to town, Greg said, glancing around with uncertainty. I don't want anything to follow us. Together, they traversed the wooded path, each step lighter than the last. The tales that had once filled their minds with terror were now just whispers carried away by the winds of change. As dawn painted the horizon in hues of gold and crimson, Annie turned to her friends. This isn't just about surviving. We've learned something powerful, something we can carry with us. We faced the darkness, and we won. They nodded in agreement, hearts mending with the promise of hope. The secrets of the woods would stay hidden for now, but they felt the weight of their fears lessen with each step back toward the light. The trio exited the woods hand in hand, stronger than before, ready to face whatever lay ahead. They had lived through nightmares, the shadows now a part of their story, transformed from terror into triumph. As the sun broke over the treetops, bringing warmth and brightness, Annie took a deep breath, finally free. They had faced their demons and emerged victorious. The woods behind them faded into a distant memory, a chapter closed and sealed. And just like that, the tale of the three brave souls became legend, whispered through townsfolk for generations to come. But little did they know, the shadows never truly disappear, remnants linger, waiting to see who else might enter the woods at midnight. Now, dear friends, before you go, you need to subscribe immediately. Don't let the next exclusive story slip through your fingers. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm that feeds us all. Flood the comments section with your reactions and theories. What did you think of the ending? Your thoughts matter. And for goodness sake, share this video with at least 5 friends who love a good scare. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second.